In a sleek Seattle office building, a quiet data analyst was about to discover something that would shatter her sense of workplace safety. What started as a routine Monday morning took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a surveillance camera mounted directly above her desk. Olivia Collins wasn't your typical corporate employee. For 3 years, she had spent her life meticulously analyzing data and following every company rule, known for her methodical attention to detail and conflict-averse nature. When she encountered her micromanaging boss's dismissive explanation about productivity optimization, she had no idea she was walking into a corporate conspiracy that violated federal privacy laws. Her decision to investigate further would lead to criminal prosecutions, congressional hearings, and a complete transformation of workplace privacy rights across America. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia Collins balanced her coffee cup against her hip as she swiped her badge at the Pinnacle Consulting Solutions entrance, the familiar beep marking the start of another Monday. The Seattle morning drizzle had left droplets on her glasses, and she paused in the lobby to clean them, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as commuters hurried past on Pine Street. At 28, she'd developed a precise morning routine that helped calm the anxiety that always seemed to lurk beneath her composed exterior. Arrive by 7:45, check emails before the office filled with noise, tackle the most complex data analysis while her mind was sharp. But as she approached her workstation on the 3rd floor, something felt wrong. The sensation hit her before she could articulate what had changed. Her desk sat in the same corner of the analytics department, flanked by the same beige filing cabinets and motivational posters about synergy and innovation. Her dual monitors displayed the familiar login screen, and her small succulent plant, a gift from her sister Sarah, remained in its usual spot beside her keyboard. Everything appeared normal until she looked up. A small black camera, no bigger than a deck of cards, was mounted directly above her workstation. The lens pointed down at her chair with unmistakable precision. Olivia's coffee cup trembled in her hand. She set it down carefully, her analytical mind immediately cataloging details. The camera's professional mounting bracket, the thin black cable running along the ceiling toward the server room, the way it was positioned to capture not just her work area but anyone who might approach her desk. This wasn't part of the building's existing security system. She would have noticed it during the 3 years she'd occupied this exact spot. "Excuse me," she called to Janet from accounting, who was hanging her coat in a nearby cubicle. "Did you notice when they installed that camera?" Janet glanced up, following Olivia's gesture. "What camera?" "Oh, that thing. Sometime over the weekend, I think. Weird place for security, right? Usually they put those in the common areas." Olivia's chest tightened. A security camera in the main lobby or break room made sense, but above her individual workspace? She pulled out her phone and took several photos, noting the timestamp, 7:52 a.m., Monday, October 14th. Her mother had always said that Olivia's attention to detail was both a blessing and a curse, useful for catching data discrepancies in client reports, but also for noticing things that others might overlook or choose to ignore. Her supervisor Richard Hawthorne's office door stood open across the department. Olivia gathered her courage and walked over, her sensible flats making soft sounds against the industrial carpet. Richard sat hunched over his computer, his thinning hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. At 42, he carried himself with the defensive posture of someone who'd climbed the corporate ladder through persistence rather than competence. "Richard? Could I speak with you about something?" He looked up, his pale eyes immediately narrowing. "What is it, Collins?" "I'm preparing for the 9 o'clock staff meeting. There's a camera that's been installed above my desk. I wasn't notified about any surveillance changes, and I'm concerned about what?" Richard's voice carried that particular tone he used when he wanted to establish dominance, condescending, wrapped in false patience. "It's a productivity optimization tool, part of our new workplace efficiency metrics initiative." Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I wasn't aware of any such initiative. Could you point me to the policy documentation?" Richard's fingers drummed against his desk. "It's not your job to question management decisions, Collins. The camera is there to help us understand workflow patterns and maximize departmental output." Unless you have something to hide? The implied threat hung between them. Olivia's parents had fled their home country with nothing, working double shifts so she could attend university. Her younger brother Marcus was in his junior year at UW, and she sent him $800 every month for expenses their parents couldn't cover. She couldn't afford to lose this job, and Richard knew it. "Of course not," she said quietly. "I just prefer to understand company policies." "Your attitude lately has been noted," Richard said, turning back to his screen. "I suggest you focus on the Morrison client analysis instead of creating problems where none exist." Olivia returned to her desk, her hands shaking slightly as she logged into her computer. She opened a new document and began typing. Monday, October 14th, 7:58 a.m., conversation with Richard Hawthorne regarding surveillance camera installation. Her mother had taught her to document everything important, a habit born from years of navigating bureaucratic systems as immigrants. The morning passed slowly. Every few minutes, Olivia found herself glancing at the camera, hyper-aware of her movements. She adjusted her posture when she stretched, hesitated before checking her personal phone, and felt self-conscious about the energy bar she ate at her desk. The constant awareness of being watched created a low-level stress that made concentration difficult. During her lunch break, she searched the company intranet for any mention of surveillance policies or productivity monitoring. The employee handbook, last updated 18 months ago, contained standard language about security cameras in common areas, but nothing about individual workstation monitoring. She also found no announcements about new efficiency initiatives or changes to workplace monitoring policies. Her research was interrupted by David Park sliding into the chair beside her desk. David worked in IT support and had the kind of relaxed demeanor that came from being genuinely competent at his job. His grandmother had immigrated from Korea in the 1960s, and like Olivia, he understood the weight of family expectations and financial responsibilities. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low. "Weird about the camera, right?" Olivia's pulse quickened. "You noticed it too? Hard to miss. But Liv, it's not just yours." David's usually jovial expression was serious. "I've been doing some maintenance work around the office, and there are cameras in places that don't make sense. The third-floor break room, outside the women's bathroom, in conference room B, all installed over the weekend." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. "That can't be legal." "That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I get security cameras in lobbies and parking garages, but this feels different. More invasive." David glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "My grandmother always told me that when people start watching you too closely, it's usually because they're planning something you won't like." Olivia thought about her conversation with Richard, his defensive attitude and implied threats. "Have you talked to anyone else about this?" "Not yet. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. But seeing your face when you came in this morning..." David shook his head. "You looked like someone had violated your personal space." "Because they had." The words came out more forcefully than Olivia intended. She lowered her voice. "This feels wrong, David. Really wrong." "Yeah, it does." David stood up, his expression troubled. "Be careful, okay? And if you decide to look into this further, you know where to find me." After David left, Olivia sat staring at her computer screen, the cursor blinking in an empty cell of her spreadsheet. The Morrison client analysis that Richard had mentioned, a routine quarterly review that should have taken her 3 hours, remained untouched. Instead, she opened a new document and began creating a detailed log of everything she'd observed: the camera's location, Richard's responses, David's revelations about additional surveillance equipment. She thought about her sister Sarah, currently in her sophomore year studying pre-law. Sarah would probably tell her to file a complaint with HR immediately, to stand up for her rights. But Sarah had the luxury of idealism. She didn't have to worry about rent, about sending money home, about the practical realities of challenging authority in a workplace. As the afternoon wore on, Olivia found herself documenting not just facts but her emotional responses, the way her shoulders tensed whenever she remembered the camera was there, how she'd started unconsciously altering her behavior, the growing resentment at being made to feel like a suspect in her own workplace. Her analytical training had taught her that data without context was meaningless, but human behavior told stories that numbers alone couldn't capture. By 5:30, most of her colleagues had left for the day. Olivia remained at her desk, ostensibly finishing the Morrison analysis but actually researching Washington state privacy laws on her phone. What she found made her stomach clench. Recording employees without their knowledge or consent, particularly in areas where they had a reasonable expectation of privacy, appeared to violate multiple statutes. The office grew quiet around her, the hum of computers and distant traffic creating a soundtrack to her growing unease. The camera above her desk seemed to watch her with mechanical indifference. Its red recording light, a tiny beacon of surveillance in the gathering darkness outside. Olivia saved her work and gathered her things, but paused before leaving. She pulled out her phone and took one more photo of the camera, this one capturing the way the late afternoon light caught its lens. Tomorrow, she decided, she would dig deeper. Her parents hadn't sacrificed everything so she could be intimidated into silence. There had to be answers, and if Richard wouldn't provide them, she'd find them herself. As she walked toward the elevator, Olivia didn't notice the way the camera's lens tracked her movement, or how similar devices throughout the building were silently recording the departure of other employees. She was focused on the questions multiplying in her mind, unaware that her methodical documentation had already begun to build the foundation for something much larger than a simple workplace complaint. The pieces of a conspiracy were falling into place, though Olivia wouldn't recognize the pattern for several more days. For now, she simply felt the weight of being watched, and the growing conviction that she wouldn't, accept it quietly. The elevator doors closed behind Olivia with a soft, pneumatic hiss, but her mind remained fixed on the camera's unblinking eye. As she drove home through Seattle's evening traffic, the red recording light seemed burned into her retinas, a digital scarlet letter marking her as someone worth watching. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the black leather. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold beside her. Her one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill was modest but comfortable, filled with the kind of carefully chosen second-hand furniture that spoke to both financial consciousness and good taste. She'd created a spreadsheet titled Workplace Observations and was methodically entering everything she'd noticed: timestamps, locations, conversations, her own emotional responses to each incident. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How was work today? You seemed stressed when I called yesterday." Olivia stared at the message for a long moment. Her sister's intuition had always been sharp, but Olivia wasn't ready to worry her. Not yet. "Just the usual Monday madness," she typed back. "Focus on your midterms." The next morning, Olivia arrived at the office 15 minutes earlier than usual. She wanted to observe the camera in the cold light of dawn, to see if her emotional response had been an overreaction. It wasn't. If anything, the surveillance equipment looked more intrusive in the morning fluorescent glare, its professional mounting and expensive-looking hardware suggesting this was no temporary measure. She settled at her desk and opened her laptop, but instead of diving into the Morrison analysis, she began what she privately called the project. Using her lunch breaks and the quiet periods between assignments, Olivia started mapping the office systematically. She carried a small notebook, the kind she'd used in college for field observations, and sketched the layout of each floor, marking camera locations with small red dots. David proved to be an invaluable ally. His IT responsibilities gave him legitimate reasons to move throughout the building, and his naturally observant nature made him the perfect reconnaissance partner. They developed a subtle communication system. A tap on the shoulder meant "camera spotted," while a casual comment about network connectivity issues indicated they should meet in the parking garage to compare notes. "Third floor break room," David whispered during one of their garage meetings on Wednesday. "High-definition camera with a clear view of the microwave and lunch tables." I checked the model number. It's the same equipment they use for security at airports. Olivia felt her chest tighten. That's where people make personal phone calls. Where Jenny from HR talks to her divorce lawyer every Tuesday. I know. David's usually cheerful demeanor was grim. And there's something else. I was running diagnostics on the network yesterday and found massive data uploads happening during off hours. We're talking terabytes of information being transmitted to an external server every night. The implications made Olivia's stomach churn. They're not just watching us, they're recording everything. Their investigation took on new urgency. Olivia began arriving even earlier, staying later, using every free moment to document the surveillance network. She discovered cameras in Conference Room B, where employees often took confidential client calls. Another in the fourth-floor alcove, where people went to cry after difficult meetings or personal phone calls. The positioning was too precise to be accidental. These devices were placed to capture moments of vulnerability. Meanwhile, Richard's behavior toward Olivia grew increasingly erratic. He instituted new policies that seemed designed specifically to make her life miserable. Mandatory hourly check-ins, detailed justifications for any time away from her desk, and criticism of work that had previously earned praise. On Thursday, he called her into his office and handed her a form requiring her to account for every 15-minute block of her workday. "This is part of our new efficiency tracking system," he said, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You'll need to submit this daily, along with detailed explanations for any periods of non-productive activity." Olivia scanned the form, her analytical mind immediately recognizing it for what it was: harassment disguised as policy. Will everyone be completing these forms? Only employees whose productivity metrics indicate room for improvement. Richard's smile was thin and cold. "I'm sure you understand the importance of continuous optimization in our competitive marketplace." That evening, Olivia called her parents. Her mother answered in Tagalog, the familiar rhythm of her childhood language providing comfort amid the stress of her workplace situation. "Anak, you sound tired," her mother said, switching to English. "Are you eating enough? Working too hard?" "I'm fine, Mama. Just some challenges at work." Olivia couldn't bring herself to explain the full situation. Her parents had faced enough workplace discrimination in their own careers. She didn't want to add to their worries. "Your father says to remember what we taught you about standing up for yourself," her mother continued, and Olivia realized her father had been listening on the extension. "But be smart about it. Document everything. Truth is your best protection." The advice proved prophetic. On Friday, Olivia's systematic documentation paid off when she overheard Janet from accounting talking to her cubicle neighbor about performance reviews. "It's the weirdest thing," Janet said, unpacking her lunch. "My supervisor mentioned my phone call with my mother about my dad's surgery, but I took that call in the break room during lunch. How could she possibly know what we discussed?" Olivia's blood ran cold. She approached Janet carefully, expressing sympathy about her father's health while gently probing for details. The story that emerged was chilling. Janet's supervisor had referenced not just the existence of the call, but specific details about medical procedures and family financial concerns, information that could only have been obtained through audio surveillance. "I felt so violated," Janet confided, "like nothing in this place is private anymore." That afternoon, David made a discovery that changed everything. Using his administrative access to troubleshoot what he told his supervisor was a network security concern, he managed to trace the camera system's digital footprint. What he found made their worst suspicions seem naive. "Liv, we need to talk," he said, appearing at her desk with the barely controlled panic of someone who'd discovered something terrible. "Parking garage. Now." In the dim concrete space beneath the building, David's voice shook as he revealed what he'd uncovered. "It's not just cameras. They're logging every keystroke on our computers, monitoring our internet usage, even tracking our personal phones when we connect to the company Wi-Fi. And the recordings, they're being categorized and stored. I found file names like personal_conversations and emotional_responses. Olivia leaned against her car, feeling suddenly dizzy. "That's illegal. That has to be illegal." "It is. Multiple federal and state privacy laws." "But Liv, there's more." David's voice dropped to a whisper. "Some of the files have tags suggesting they've been reviewed by management. They're not just collecting this information, they're actively using it. The revelation crystallized everything Olivia had been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't about productivity optimization or workplace efficiency. This was systematic violation of employee privacy, potentially for purposes they couldn't yet imagine. Her analytical mind began processing the implications: blackmail material, insider information, personal leverage against anyone who might challenge company policies. As they stood in the parking garage, the weight of their discovery settling around them like a suffocating blanket, Olivia realized she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer just a concerned employee trying to understand an uncomfortable workplace change. She had become an investigator uncovering what appeared to be a criminal conspiracy. "We have to do something," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. David nodded, his usual humor replaced by grim determination. "Yeah, we do. But we need to be smart about it. And we need help." Above them, the ordinary sounds of a corporate office continued. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the mundane soundtrack of people going about their workday, unaware that their most private moments were being captured, cataloged, and stored by the very company that employed them. The weekend stretched before Olivia like a minefield of anxiety and determination. She couldn't shake the image of David's pale face in the parking garage, or the way his voice had trembled when he'd revealed the scope of the surveillance system. Saturday morning found her at her kitchen table again, laptop open, surrounded by printed screenshots and hand-drawn office maps that looked like the work of a conspiracy theorist, which, she supposed, she was becoming. David had agreed to meet her at Pike Place Market on Sunday, a public location where they could talk freely without fear of corporate surveillance. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now thought in terms of safe spaces to discuss her own workplace. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I've been thinking about this all weekend," David said as they walked among the market stalls, the familiar chaos of tourists and vendors providing cover for their conversation. "What we found, it's not just about watching us work. They're building profiles." Olivia clutched her coffee cup tighter. "Profiles for what?" "Control. Leverage. Think about it. If you know someone's deepest secrets, their financial pressures, their family problems, you can manipulate them, keep them in line." David's usual laid-back demeanor had been replaced by the sharp focus of his hacktivist past. "My grandmother lived through the martial law period in Korea. She's told me stories about how governments used information to control people. This feels familiar." The comparison sent a chill down Olivia's spine, but she forced herself to stay analytical. "We need concrete evidence, not just our suspicions, but proof that would hold up in court." David nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about that too, and I might have a way in." Monday morning arrived with the kind of drizzle that made Seattle famous, turning the office windows into abstract paintings of water and light. Olivia sat at her desk, hyper-aware of the camera's presence above her, and tried to appear normal while her mind raced with plans. David had explained his approach, using his legitimate IT access to perform what appeared to be routine system maintenance, while actually documenting the surveillance network's architecture. The opportunity came Tuesday afternoon. David's supervisor assigned him to investigate network performance issues that David had helpfully identified as requiring comprehensive system analysis. It was the perfect cover for what they were really planning. "I'm going to need about 2 hours," David told Olivia during their brief encounter at the coffee station. "If this goes wrong—" "It won't," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. "You know these systems better than anyone." But as David disappeared into the server room with his toolkit, Olivia found herself unable to concentrate on anything. She watched the clock, jumped at every sound, and tried to look busy while her stomach churned with anxiety. At 3:47 p.m., David appeared at her desk, his face ashen. "We need to leave." "Now," he said quietly. "Tell Richard you're feeling sick. Meet me at that coffee shop on Pine Street in 20 minutes. Olivia's heart hammered as she gathered her things and approached Richard's office. "I'm not feeling well," she said, not having to fake the nausea that had been building all afternoon. "I think I should go home." Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but he waved her away with irritation. Fine. But I expect you here early tomorrow to make up the time. The coffee shop on Pine Street was nearly empty at 4 p.m., the afternoon lull between lunch and dinner crowds. David sat in a corner booth, his laptop open, and his hands shaking slightly as he gestured for Olivia to sit across from him. I got in, he said without preamble. And Liv, it's worse than we thought. So much worse. The laptop screen showed what appeared to be a file directory, but the folder names made Olivia's blood run cold. Employee_personal_calls, private_conversations, emotional_episodes, family_financial_data. Each folder contained hundreds of video and audio files, organized by employee name and date. They have everything, David whispered. Jenny's calls with her divorce lawyer, Tom's panic attack last month when he thought he was having a heart attack, Maria's conversation with her daughter about her eating disorder. His voice cracked. They recorded my grandmother asking me to help her with her medication. She was crying because she couldn't remember if she'd taken her pills. Olivia stared at the screen, feeling sick. How long has this been going on? Based on the file dates? At least 8 months. But here's the really twisted part. Some files have viewing logs. Management has been watching these recordings, reviewing them, taking notes. David clicked to another directory labeled analysis_reports. The files inside had clinical titles like employee_vulnerability_assessment and leverage_opportunities. Olivia opened one at random and found a detailed psychological profile of a coworker, complete with notes about his financial problems, relationship issues, and how these vulnerabilities could be exploited to ensure compliance. This is blackmail material, Olivia breathed. They're not just watching us, they're weaponizing our private lives. It gets worse. David's voice was barely audible. I found communications between Richard and Marcus Thompson. The CEO authorized this program personally. He calls it human resource optimization. The euphemism made Olivia feel physically ill. She thought about Janet's medical conversation being referenced in performance reviews, about her own increasing harassment since she'd started asking questions about the cameras. They're using this to control people, to make sure no one speaks up about anything. David nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he copied files to an encrypted drive. I managed to download about 3 gigabytes before the system started logging my access. We have evidence. But what? But if they review the access logs, they'll know it was me. My IT credentials are all over this. David's face was pale. I might have just ended my career. Worse, I might have committed a felony. Olivia reached across the table and gripped his hand. You did the right thing. People have a right to know they're being watched, to know their privacy is being violated. I hope you're right. David closed the laptop and handed her the encrypted drive. Because there's no going back now. Once we reveal this, Pinnacle is going to come after us with everything they have. As they sat in the coffee shop, the weight of their discovery settling around them like a physical presence, Olivia realized that her comfortable, predictable life was over. She thought about her parents, who had trusted institutions that ultimately betrayed them, about her sister Sarah, who believed in justice and accountability, about all the coworkers who went to the break room thinking their personal conversations were private, who made difficult phone calls believing no one was listening. We have to expose this, she said finally. Not just for us, but for everyone. David nodded slowly. I know someone who might help. A journalist who specializes in corporate privacy violations. But Liv, once we contact her, there's no stopping this train. Good, Olivia said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Because this train has been running people down for 8 months. It's time someone put on the brakes. Outside the coffee shop, Seattle continued its daily rhythm. Commuters heading home, students walking to evening classes, the ordinary flow of people living their lives. None of them knew that in a small corner booth, 2 employees had just uncovered evidence of systematic surveillance that violated everything they thought they knew about privacy, dignity, and trust in the workplace. The real fight was about to begin. The encrypted drive felt heavier than its few ounces as Olivia clutched it in her purse Monday morning. She'd spent the weekend in a fog of anxiety and determination, alternating between moments of clarity about what needed to be done and paralyzing fear about the consequences. David's revelation had transformed their suspicions into undeniable proof of criminal activity, but it had also made them targets. She arrived at the office early, hoping to catch Jessica Martinez before the HR director's day filled with meetings. The third floor was quiet, most employees still commuting through Seattle's morning traffic, and Olivia found Jessica in her office reviewing what appeared to be personnel files. "Olivia?" Jessica looked up, surprised. "You're here early. Everything all right?" Jessica Martinez had always struck Olivia as different from other corporate executives. Maybe it was her background as an employment lawyer, or the photos of her two young daughters that dominated her desk, but there was something more human about her approach to HR than the typical corporate shield-bearer. Olivia had counted on that humanity as she'd rehearsed this conversation over the weekend. "I need to show you something," Olivia said, closing the office door behind her. "Something I discovered about the company that I think you need to know about." Jessica's expression shifted to concern. "This sounds serious. Sit down." Olivia had prepared for this moment, but her hands still trembled as she pulled out her laptop and connected the encrypted drive. "Last week, I noticed surveillance cameras being installed throughout the office. Not just security cameras, targeted surveillance of individual workstations and private areas. I heard there were some new efficiency monitoring tools being implemented," Jessica said carefully. "Part of a productivity initiative from upper management. It's not productivity monitoring." Olivia opened the first folder of evidence. "It's illegal surveillance. Audio and video recording in areas where employees have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And they're using the information to build psychological profiles and leverage against employees." Jessica's face went pale as Olivia showed her the directory structure David had uncovered. The clinical folder names, employee_personal_calls, emotional_episodes, leverage_opportunities, spoke for themselves. When Olivia opened a sample vulnerability assessment file, Jessica physically recoiled. "This can't be real," Jessica whispered. "Marcus wouldn't authorize something like this. The authorization came directly from him. There are email communications between him and Richard Hawthorne discussing implementation details." Olivia showed her the evidence David had captured. "Jessica, they recorded Jenny's calls with her divorce lawyer. They have audio of Tom's panic attack. They're building files on every employee's personal vulnerabilities." Jessica stared at the screen for a long moment, her professional composure cracking. "If this is accurate, this violates multiple federal and state laws, wiretapping statutes, privacy regulations, potentially RICO, if it's part of a broader pattern of corporate misconduct. I know. The question is, what do we do about it?" Jessica closed her eyes, and Olivia could see the internal battle playing out on her face. "I need to investigate this internally first, follow proper channels, give the company a chance to address the violations before." "Jessica, they've been doing this for 8 months. They're not going to stop because HR asks nicely." Olivia leaned forward. "People are being hurt, manipulated. Their most private moments are being used against them. I understand that, but I have obligations. To the company, to due process." Jessica's voice carried the strain of someone caught between competing loyalties. "If I help you go public with this without following internal procedures first, I could lose my job. My daughters depend on my income." The mention of Jessica's children reminded Olivia of her own financial pressures, the weight of her brother's tuition and her parents' expectations. But looking at the evidence on her laptop screen, the cold, clinical reduction of human vulnerability to corporate leverage, she realized some things mattered more than job security. "I'm not asking you to go public," Olivia said. "I'm asking you to investigate, to use your position to protect employees who don't even know they need protection." Jessica nodded slowly. "I'll look into it. But Olivia, you need to be very careful. If what you're showing me is accurate, then you've uncovered something that powerful people have invested significant resources in keeping secret. They won't hesitate to retaliate." That evening, Olivia called her sister Sarah from her apartment. She'd been putting off this conversation for days, but the weight of carrying this secret alone was becoming unbearable. "Liv, you sound terrible," Sarah said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "What's going on?" "I've discovered something at work. Something illegal." Olivia found herself explaining the surveillance network, David's investigation, and the evidence they'd uncovered. Sarah listened with growing outrage. "This is insane. You have to go public immediately. Post it on social media, contact journalists, make it impossible for them to suppress." Sarah's voice carried the righteous fury of someone who'd grown up believing in justice and accountability. "I can help you create viral content. My sorority sisters have huge social media followings." "Sarah, slow down." Olivia appreciated her sister's passion, but the suggestion terrified her. "This isn't like sharing a video of police misconduct. These are corporate records. If I release them wrong, I could face federal charges for theft of proprietary information." "So what? Sometimes you have to break unjust laws to expose injustice. That's how change happens." The generational difference in their approaches to activism struck Olivia forcefully. Sarah had grown up in the social media age, where viral campaigns could topple governments and hashtags could drive social change. But Olivia remembered their parents' stories about speaking out against authority, the years of harassment and retaliation that followed. "I'm not saying we don't go public," Olivia said carefully. "I'm saying we need to be strategic, protected. I've been researching journalists who specialize in corporate exposés, and there are whistleblower protections if we follow the right procedures." "While you're being strategic, more people are being violated," Sarah shot back. "How many of your coworkers' private conversations are being recorded while you figure out the perfect way to reveal it?" The argument continued for another 20 minutes, neither sister willing to yield. Sarah wanted immediate action, viral exposure, and public accountability. Olivia wanted careful documentation, legal protection, and strategic media engagement. Both approaches had merit, but they reflected fundamentally different philosophies about how change occurred in complex systems. After they hung up, Olivia sat in her kitchen staring at the encrypted drive. Sarah's criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. Every day they delayed going public was another day of ongoing violations. But Jessica's warnings about retaliation felt equally valid. Corporate America had sophisticated tools for destroying whistleblowers, and Olivia had no illusions about Pinnacle's willingness to use them. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Richard asked me about, quote, unusual network activity today. I think they're getting suspicious. We need to move fast." The message crystallized Olivia's resolve. Whether she was ready or not, events were accelerating beyond her control. Tomorrow, she would begin reaching out to the journalists and attorneys she'd researched. The evidence was too damning to remain secret, and the risks of exposure were beginning to pale beside the ongoing harm to her colleagues. As she prepared for bed, Olivia thought about the vulnerability assessments in Pinnacle's files, the cold calculation behind their surveillance program. They had reduced human beings to data points, privacy to a commodity that could be traded for corporate advantage. It was time to remind them that some things couldn't be quantified, controlled, or silenced. Tuesday morning brought news that shattered Olivia's remaining faith in internal channels. Jessica Martinez appeared at her desk before 9 a.m., her usually composed demeanor cracked with frustration and barely contained anger. "We need to talk," Jessica said quietly. "Conference room C now." The small conference room felt claustrophobic as Jessica closed the door and activated the white noise machine, a precaution that now seemed grimly ironic given what they knew about Pinnacle's surveillance capabilities. "I tried," Jessica said without preamble. "I followed every internal procedure, documented everything properly, and presented a formal complaint to Marcus Thompson yesterday afternoon." Olivia's stomach dropped. "What did he say?" "He denied everything. Called your evidence fabricated materials created by a disgruntled employee with access to sophisticated editing software." Jessica's voice carried the bitter disappointment of someone whose faith in institutional integrity had been shattered. "Then he suggested I might be, quote, experiencing undue stress, and offered me a paid leave of absence to, quote, regain perspective." The threat was clear. Jessica continued, her hands clasped tightly on the conference table. Olivia, I've spent 15 years believing that companies could be reformed from the inside, that ethical people in leadership positions could make a difference. But Marcus looked me in the eye and lied about something we both know is happening. Then he tried to gaslight me into questioning my own judgment. I'm sorry, Olivia said, though the words felt inadequate. I know how much you wanted to handle this internally. The thing is, his reaction confirmed everything. If this were legitimate productivity monitoring, he would have shown me the authorization documents, explained the legal framework, defended the program's scope. Instead, he tried to discredit the evidence and intimidate me into silence. Jessica's voice hardened. That's not the behavior of someone with nothing to hide. That afternoon, Olivia made 2 phone calls that would change the trajectory of her life. The first was to Elena Vasquez, an investigative journalist at the Seattle Times whose exposé of wage theft at a major tech company had won a Pulitzer Prize the previous year. The second was to Rebecca Santos, a labor rights attorney whose nonprofit organization specialized in protecting whistleblowers. Elena agreed to meet that evening at a small cafe in Fremont, away from downtown Seattle's corporate corridor. Rebecca suggested a conference call for the following morning, citing the urgency of establishing legal protections before any public disclosure. The cafe on 36th Street buzzed with the comfortable noise of neighborhood locals, artists, writers, and the kind of people who chose substance over corporate polish. Elena Vasquez fit the environment perfectly. Early 40s, silver-streaked black hair, and the kind of intense focus that suggested she'd spent decades listening to people reveal their most dangerous secrets. David Park contacted me yesterday, Elena said after they'd ordered coffee. He explained the basic situation and provided some preliminary evidence. What I need from you is the complete picture. How you discovered the surveillance, what you've documented, and what you're hoping to achieve by going public. For the next 2 hours, Olivia walked Elena through everything. The camera's appearance above her desk, David's technical investigation, the psychological profiles and leverage assessments they'd uncovered. Elena took notes in a shorthand that looked like code, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting specific documentation. This is significant, Elena said, finally, not just because of the privacy violations, but because it suggests a systematic approach to employee control that could be industry-wide. I've been hearing rumors about similar programs at other tech companies, but nothing concrete enough to investigate. What happens now? Olivia asked. Now I verify everything. I'll need to interview other employees, review the technical evidence with independent experts, and confirm the legal violations with privacy law specialists. It's a thorough process but necessary. Pinnacle will challenge every aspect of our reporting. Elena's expression was serious. I should warn you, once this story publishes, your life will change dramatically. Corporate whistleblowing isn't just about revealing wrongdoing, it's about surviving the retaliation that follows. The warning echoed in Olivia's mind as she drove home through Seattle's evening traffic. At a red light on Aurora Avenue, she called Sarah. I'm doing it, Olivia said when her sister answered. Going public with the surveillance evidence. But I need your help with something. Of course. What do you need? Social media strategy. Elena says the story will have more impact if it reaches younger audiences through digital platforms, not just traditional media. You understand that world better than I do. Sarah's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious. I've been thinking about this since our last conversation. We need hashtags that connect to broader movements. Hashtag workplace privacy, hashtag digital rights, hashtag corporate accountability. And we should time the social media push to coincide with the article's publication for maximum viral potential. They spent an hour developing a comprehensive digital strategy. Sarah would create social media accounts using pseudonyms, draft shareable content that highlighted the human impact of surveillance, and coordinate with student organizations and labor rights groups she'd connected with through her pre-law program. Liv, I'm proud of you, Sarah said as their call wound down. I know this is terrifying, but you're doing the right thing. People deserve to know when their privacy is being violated. Wednesday morning's conference call with Rebecca Santos provided the legal framework Olivia needed to move forward with confidence. Rebecca's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years protecting whistleblowers from corporate retaliation. Washington state has strong privacy protections and robust anti-retaliation statutes, Rebecca explained. Based on what you've described, Pinnacle has violated multiple federal and state laws. More importantly, your disclosure appears to qualify for whistleblower protection under both state and federal statutes. What does that mean practically? Olivia asked. It means they can't fire you for revealing illegal activity, and if they try other forms of retaliation, demotion, harassment, blacklisting, you have legal recourse. My organization will represent you pro bono and will file protective motions with the state labor board immediately. The legal protections provided a sense of security, but Rebecca's next words reminded Olivia of the challenges ahead. However, corporate attorneys are sophisticated about circumventing whistleblower protections. They'll try to find other reasons to terminate you, create hostile working conditions to force your resignation, or launch legal challenges to discredit your evidence. We'll fight all of that, but I want you to understand what you're facing. By Thursday evening, Elena had completed her fact-checking and legal review. The article was scheduled for publication Friday morning, with the headline, "Tech Firm's Secret Surveillance Network Violated Employee Privacy Rights." Sarah had coordinated social media accounts and prepared viral content to launch simultaneously with the article's release. Olivia sat in her apartment Thursday night, staring at her laptop screen showing Elena's final article draft. Tomorrow, her name would be associated with corporate whistleblowing. Her quiet life as a data analyst would end, replaced by the uncertain future of someone who'd challenged powerful interests. She thought about her parents, who'd fled authoritarian surveillance in their home country only to see their daughter uncover it in an American workplace. About her colleagues, who deserved to know their private conversations were being recorded and analyzed. About future employees who might be spared similar violations if this exposure led to meaningful change. At 11:47 p.m., Olivia sent Elena a text. "Publish it." The point of no return had arrived. Friday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that follows life-altering decisions. Olivia woke at 5:30 a.m., her internal clock disrupted by anxiety and anticipation. Elena's article had gone live at midnight, and Sarah's social media campaign had launched in coordination. By the time Olivia checked her phone, #workplaceprivacy was trending on Twitter, and her notifications were flooded with messages from strangers expressing outrage and support. The headline dominated the Seattle Times homepage, "Tech Firm's Secret Surveillance Network Violated Employee Privacy Rights." Below it, a smaller subheading read, "Pinnacle Consulting Solutions recorded employees in break rooms, monitored personal calls, built psychological profiles for corporate leverage." Olivia's hands trembled as she read Elena's thorough reporting. Every detail had been verified, every legal violation carefully documented. The article included quotes from employment lawyers calling the surveillance program unprecedented in its scope and invasiveness, and privacy experts comparing it to East German Stasi techniques adapted for corporate America. Her phone rang at 6:15 a.m. Elena's voice was tense but excited. "The story's exploding. CNN wants to interview you this afternoon, and I've had calls from labor organizations, privacy advocates, and 3 other major newspapers. Are you ready for this?" "I don't think anyone's ever ready for this," Olivia replied, watching the social media metrics Sarah had shared climb exponentially. "But yes, let's do it." The drive to Pinnacle felt surreal. Olivia passed the same familiar landmarks. The coffee shop where she and David had planned their investigation, the parking garage where they'd shared evidence. But everything felt transformed by the morning's revelations. She arrived at the office to find a cluster of reporters and cameras already assembled outside the building. Security guards she'd never seen before flanked the entrance, checking IDs with unusual scrutiny. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Colleagues whispered in small groups, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed her. Some offered supportive nods, others looked away entirely. Richard Hawthorne was waiting at her desk, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. His face was flushed with barely controlled rage, and his hands shook as he held an official-looking document. "Miss Collins," one of the suited men said, stepping forward. "I'm James Liu, Pinnacle's general counsel. You're being placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your theft of proprietary company information and violation of your employment agreement." Olivia had expected this moment, but the reality still felt like a physical blow. "I haven't stolen anything. I've exposed illegal surveillance activities. You've selectively edited and misrepresented routine security protocols to create a false narrative," James continued, his voice carrying the polished menace of corporate legal intimidation. "Your employment is suspended immediately, and you're required to surrender all company property and leave the premises under security escort." The walk to the elevator felt endless. Colleagues she'd worked alongside for 3 years watched as security guards flanked her like a criminal. Some faces showed sympathy, others confusion, and a few displayed the kind of calculated distance that suggested they were already protecting themselves from association with her. David appeared as she was cleaning out her desk, his face pale with worry. "Liv, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't accessed those files." "This isn't your fault," Olivia said firmly, packing her few personal items into a cardboard box. "We did the right thing. People deserve to know they're being watched." "They called me into HR an hour ago," David whispered, "accused me of unauthorized network access. I think I'm next." Before Olivia could respond, Richard stepped between them. "Mr. Park, you're needed in conference room A immediately. Ms. Collins, you need to leave now." The security escort through the lobby was designed for maximum humiliation. Other employees stopped their conversations to stare as Olivia was walked out like a terminated malefactor. The reporters outside immediately recognized her, shouting questions and raising cameras. Olivia kept her head down, following Rebecca Santos's advice to avoid any statements until they'd coordinated a legal response. By noon, Pinnacle's counterattack was in full swing. James Liu held a press conference on the steps of the company's headquarters, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting corporate authority and reasonableness. "Ms. Collins is a disgruntled employee who violated her oath of confidentiality and stole proprietary information," he announced to the assembled media. "She has selectively edited routine security footage and fabricated documents to support false allegations against a company that has invested significantly in her career development." The statement was masterfully crafted corporate doublespeak, designed to plant seeds of doubt about Olivia's credibility without directly addressing the substance of her allegations. James continued, "Pinnacle Consulting Solutions maintains the highest standards of employee privacy and follows all applicable laws. We will vigorously defend ourselves against these baseless accusations and pursue all legal remedies against those who have participated in this coordinated attack on our reputation." Olivia watched the press conference from Rebecca's office, feeling sick as she witnessed the machinery of corporate damage control swing into action. Within hours, Pinnacle had released a detailed statement questioning her mental stability, professional competence, and financial motivations. They suggested she was seeking attention and monetary gain through false accusations. "This is textbook corporate retaliation," Rebecca said, muting the television. "They can't defend the surveillance program on its merits, so they're attacking your character instead. It's despicable, but predictable." The personal attacks intensified throughout the day. Anonymous sources, clearly company officials, told reporters that Olivia had been struggling with performance issues and had exhibited concerning behavior in recent weeks. They suggested her allegations were revenge for being, quote, counseled about her attitude and work quality. Sarah's social media campaign proved crucial in countering the narrative. Her hashtags had attracted support from privacy advocates, labor organizers, and ordinary workers who shared their own experiences of workplace surveillance. Hashtag workplace privacy was joined by hashtag believe whistleblowers and hashtag corporate accountability, creating a broader conversation about employee rights in the digital age. But the personal cost was immediate and devastating. By evening, Olivia had received dozens of threatening messages on social media, her phone number had been leaked online, and someone had posted her home address on a forum dedicated to exposing corporate traitors. Rebecca arranged for private security and advised Olivia to stay with friends or family until the immediate threats subsided. The financial pressure was equally severe. Her health insurance would be terminated within 30 days, her apartment lease required employment verification for renewal, and her ability to send money to Marcus for college expenses had evaporated overnight. The comfortable middle-class stability she'd built over 3 years at Pinnacle had disappeared in a single morning. That evening, as Olivia sat in Sarah's University District apartment, her sister's roommates offered awkward sympathy and tactical advice about managing viral social media attention. The surreal nature of her situation struck her forcefully. 12 hours earlier, she'd been an anonymous data analyst. Now she was a public figure in a national conversation about workplace privacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "They fired me this afternoon. Unauthorized access to company systems. Want to grab coffee tomorrow? I think we need to stick together." The message crystallized something important for Olivia. Pinnacle's retaliation was exactly what Elena and Rebecca had predicted. But it was also validation that their allegations were accurate. Companies didn't destroy employees' lives over false accusations. They did it when the truth threatened their fundamental business model. As Seattle's evening lights twinkled beyond Sarah's window, Olivia realized that despite the fear, financial pressure, and personal attacks, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The weight of carrying Pinnacle's secrets was gone, replaced by the clear moral certainty that comes from doing the right thing regardless of the cost. The real battle was just beginning. Monday morning brought a stack of legal papers that transformed Olivia's kitchen table into a battlefield. Rebecca Santos spread the documents across the surface with the grim efficiency of someone who'd fought these wars before. 3 separate lawsuits from Pinnacle Consulting, each designed to financially devastate and legally entangle anyone who dared challenge their surveillance program. Theft of proprietary information, breach of confidentiality agreement, and intentional interference with business relationships, Rebecca read from the complaints. They're seeking $2 million in damages, plus injunctive relief to prevent you from making any further public statements. Olivia stared at the numbers, feeling physically sick. $2 million? I don't have $2,000 in savings. That's the point. Corporate lawsuits aren't really about winning. They're about punishment and deterrence. They want to bankrupt you and send a message to any other employees who might consider whistleblowing. Rebecca's expression was fierce. But they've made a tactical error. By filing so aggressively, they've validated your claims. Innocent companies don't try to destroy their accusers. The countersuit Rebecca filed that afternoon was equally aggressive. Illegal surveillance, violation of privacy rights, wrongful termination, and retaliation against a protected whistleblower. More importantly, she'd petitioned for class action status, opening the door for other Pinnacle employees to join the lawsuit. "We're not just defending you anymore," Rebecca explained as they reviewed the filing. "We're going on offense, and David Park has agreed to be a co-plaintiff, which gives us additional credibility." The media attention intensified exponentially. Elena's initial article had sparked national interest, and now major news outlets were scrambling to interview the whistleblower who'd exposed corporate surveillance. Olivia found herself scheduled for appearances on CNN, MSNBC, and NPR, each requiring careful preparation to stay on message while avoiding legal pitfalls. Her first television appearance was surreal. The CNN studio in downtown Seattle felt like an alien environment. Bright lights, multiple cameras, and the strange intimacy of discussing her most stressful experiences with millions of strangers watching. Host Anderson Cooper treated her with the respectful skepticism of experienced journalism. "Ms. Collins, Pinnacle's attorney James Liu has suggested you fabricated evidence and violated federal computer crimes laws. How do you respond to those allegations?" Olivia had rehearsed this moment with Rebecca, but the reality of defending herself on national television was more challenging than any preparation could address. "Anderson, everything I've revealed has been independently verified by technical experts and legal analysts. If Pinnacle wants to claim the evidence is fabricated, they're welcome to provide their own documentation showing these surveillance systems don't exist. But they won't, because they can't dispute the truth." The response felt stronger than she'd expected, and Cooper's follow-up questions allowed her to detail the human impact of the surveillance program. She talked about Jenny's recorded divorce conversations, Tom's filmed panic attack, and the psychological profiles designed to exploit employee vulnerabilities. "This isn't about productivity monitoring," she concluded. "It's about power and control. When companies can record your most private moments and use them against you, we've crossed a line that threatens everyone's dignity and autonomy." The interview generated significant social media response, but it also triggered an escalated attack from Pinnacle's communications team. Within hours, James Liu was on Fox Business defending the company's legitimate security measures and characterizing Olivia as, quote, an unstable individual seeking attention and financial gain through false accusations. The personal attacks became more sophisticated and vicious. Anonymous sources provided reporters with details about Olivia's college grades, her parents' immigration status, and her financial support for her brother's education. The implication was clear. She was motivated by money and had a history of academic and personal instability. They're trying to destroy your credibility by making your private life public, Elena observed during a strategy meeting at Rebecca's office. It's ironic, considering their surveillance program did exactly the same thing to their employees. But the media circus also brought unexpected support. Labor organizations rallied to Olivia's defense. Privacy advocates organized protests outside Pinnacle's offices, and other tech workers began sharing their own experiences of workplace surveillance through social media and anonymous tip lines. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah called Olivia Tuesday evening, her voice electric with excitement. "Liv, you need to check your email. Someone contacted me through the social media accounts. Someone with information about your situation." The message was from Kevin Hawthorne, Richard's 17-year-old son. His words were careful but clear. "I saw the news stories about my father's company and I need to talk to someone. I have information that might help, but I'm afraid of what it could do to my family." The moral complexity of the situation struck Olivia immediately. Kevin was a minor, caught between family loyalty and ethical obligation. Any contact with him could be characterized as manipulation or exploitation by Pinnacle's legal team. Rebecca was cautious but intrigued. "If he has relevant information, we need to hear it. But we have to be extremely careful about how we handle this. He's a minor, and his father is a key figure in their defense." They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a Starbucks near Kevin's high school, with Rebecca present to ensure proper legal protocols. Kevin Hawthorne looked younger than his 17 years, nervous and conflicted as he sat across from Olivia and Rebecca. "I found documents in my dad's home office," he said quietly. "Emails and reports about the surveillance program. I copied them because I couldn't believe what I was reading." The documents Kevin provided were devastating. Internal communications between Richard and Marcus Thompson, discussing the surveillance program's behavioral modification potential. Reports analyzing which employees were most susceptible to pressure based on their recorded private conversations. Most damaging, a memo suggesting the program could be expanded to monitor employees' homes through company-issued laptops and phones. "Why are you doing this?" Olivia asked gently. "This could hurt your father." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "Because what he's doing is wrong. My friends at school have seen the news stories, and they ask me how my dad could spy on people like that. I can't defend it anymore." He paused. "And because my mom left partly because she said he'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone who enjoyed having power over other people." The revelation added another dimension to Richard's character that Olivia hadn't considered. A man whose need for control had destroyed his personal relationships and now corrupted his professional obligations. But Kevin's cooperation also created new dangers. Within days, Pinnacle's investigators had identified him as a source of leaked information. James Liu filed motions claiming Olivia had corrupted a minor and engaged in witness tampering, while Richard faced the personal devastation of his son's public opposition to his actions. The legal warfare was escalating beyond anything Rebecca had anticipated. Federal investigators announced their own inquiry into Pinnacle's surveillance practices, validating Olivia's claims, but also raising the stakes for everyone involved. As Olivia sat in Sarah's apartment Wednesday night, watching her story dominate cable news coverage, she realized that her individual complaint about a workplace camera had become something much larger. She was now the public face of a national conversation about privacy, corporate power, and the rights of workers in an increasingly surveilled economy. The personal cost continued to mount: death threats, financial pressure, the constant stress of legal proceedings, but the momentum was shifting in their favor. Other employees were coming forward, federal authorities were investigating, and public opinion was solidifying behind the principle that workplace surveillance required transparency and consent. The fight for accountability was far from over, but for the first time since discovering that camera above her desk, Olivia felt like she might actually win. The federal agents arrived at Pinnacle Consulting Solutions on a gray Thursday morning, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Olivia watched the live stream on her laptop from Rebecca's office as FBI investigators carried boxes of computer equipment and filing cabinets out of the building she'd worked in for 3 years. The sight was both vindicating and surreal, validation that her allegations were being taken seriously at the highest levels of law enforcement. 17 search warrants executed simultaneously, Rebecca reported, scrolling through updates from their contacts in federal law enforcement. Not just Pinnacle's Seattle offices, but their data centers, Marcus Thompson's home, and affiliated companies in 3 other states. Elena called within the hour, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "This is huge, Olivia. My sources at the FBI say the investigation has uncovered surveillance programs at 4 other tech companies. What you exposed at Pinnacle appears to be part of an industry-wide pattern." The revelation that their discovery extended beyond a single company transformed the legal and media landscape overnight. What had begun as Olivia's individual complaint about workplace harassment had become evidence of systemic corporate surveillance that violated federal privacy laws on a massive scale. The FBI's preliminary findings, leaked to Elena through her investigative sources, painted a picture that was both broader and more sinister than anyone had imagined. The surveillance technology had been developed by a private security firm that marketed it specifically to corporate clients as, quote, human resource optimization tools. The company had installed similar systems at tech firms, financial services companies, and healthcare organizations across the country. They called it Project Oversight, Elena explained during an emergency meeting at Rebecca's office. A comprehensive employee monitoring solution that promised to increase productivity, reduce theft, and identify potential security risks. The marketing materials I've seen are chilling. They literally advertise the ability to build psychological profiles and predict employee behavior. Jessica Martinez became a crucial witness in the expanding investigation. Her decision to cooperate with federal authorities represented a complete break with her corporate loyalties, but also positioned her as someone who could explain how the surveillance program had been implemented and justified internally. Jessica's testimony is devastating for Pinnacle, Rebecca reported after Jessica's first deposition. She has internal memos showing that Marcus Thompson personally approved the expanded surveillance specifically to gather, quote, actionable intelligence on employees who might pose challenges to management. The evidence Jessica provided included recordings of executive meetings where surveillance footage had been reviewed and discussed. In one particularly damning recording, Richard Hawthorne could be heard describing how Jenny's divorce proceedings made her vulnerable to pressure and suggesting her work assignments be modified to take advantage of her emotional state. But the expanding investigation came at a tremendous personal cost for everyone involved. Olivia's health had deteriorated under the constant stress of legal proceedings, media attention, and death threats. She'd developed insomnia, anxiety attacks, and a persistent tremor in her hands that made typing difficult. The irony wasn't lost on her that exposing corporate surveillance had made her own life subject to intense public scrutiny. David faced his own challenges as his role in the technical investigation became public knowledge. His former hacktivist connections had attracted FBI attention, and while he wasn't facing criminal charges, the scrutiny had made him unemployable in the tech industry. His grandmother's health had declined under the stress of constant media attention and threatening phone calls. "I keep telling her this will be worth it," David said during one of their weekly coffee meetings, the circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. "But she's 87 years old, and she shouldn't have to deal with reporters camping outside her house because her grandson did the right thing." Sarah's activism had evolved into something more sophisticated and far-reaching than either sister had anticipated. Her social media campaigns had connected with privacy advocates, labor organizers, and digital rights activists around the world. She'd been invited to speak at conferences and had been contacted by law schools interested in her approach to combining traditional legal advocacy with viral social media organizing. "You've started something bigger than just exposing Pinnacle," Sarah told Olivia during one of their evening walks around the university district. "People are sharing stories about surveillance at their own workplaces, organizing to demand transparency, challenging the assumption that employers have unlimited rights to monitor their workers." The class action lawsuit was growing exponentially. Rebecca's initial filing had attracted 17 Pinnacle employees, but the federal investigation had emboldened workers at other companies to come forward. By December, more than 200 employees from 12 different companies had joined the litigation, creating one of the largest workplace privacy lawsuits in U.S. history. But the personal relationships strained by the investigation were equally significant. Kevin Hawthorne's decision to provide evidence against his father had created a family crisis that played out in public. Richard had been forced to move out of the family home, and Kevin was living with his mother while continuing to cooperate with federal investigators. "I feel terrible about Kevin," Olivia confided to Rebecca. "He's just a kid, and he's had to choose between his father and his principles. That shouldn't be a choice any teenager has to make." "The choice was Richard's," Rebecca replied firmly. "Kevin is dealing with the consequences of his father's decisions, not his own. And his courage in coming forward may have saved dozens of other families from similar violations." The financial investigation uncovered evidence that the surveillance programs had been used for purposes beyond employee monitoring. Several companies had used the collected data for insider trading, corporate espionage, and market manipulation. Marcus Thompson's communications revealed discussions about using employee personal information to gain advantages in business negotiations and competitive bidding. "This is racketeering territory now," Rebecca explained as they reviewed the latest FBI briefing materials. "Using surveillance to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. We're not just talking about privacy violations anymore. We're talking about organized criminal activity." The federal prosecutors handling the case had offered Olivia a plea agreement in exchange for her continued cooperation, but Rebecca had advised against accepting it. "You're not the criminal here," she reminded Olivia. "You're the whistleblower who exposed the criminal activity. The government should be thanking you, not asking you to plead guilty to anything." Elena's reporting had earned her a Pulitzer Prize nomination, but more importantly, it had sparked a national conversation about workplace privacy that was beginning to influence policy at the highest levels. Congressional hearings were scheduled for the following month, and privacy advocates were drafting legislation that would create federal standards for workplace surveillance disclosure. As Olivia sat in her temporary apartment, she'd been forced to move after her address was doxed. Reviewing the latest legal filings, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that Monday morning when she'd first noticed the camera above her desk. The comfortable anonymity of her former life was gone forever, replaced by the complex responsibilities of being a public figure in a national movement for workplace rights. The investigation was expanding beyond anything she'd imagined, but so was the potential for meaningful change. If their legal victory could prevent other workers from experiencing the violations she'd uncovered, then the personal costs, the sleepless nights, the financial pressure, the constant scrutiny would be justified. The system was finally responding, and accountability was within reach. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle had become a second home to Olivia over the past 18 months. As she climbed the stone steps on a crisp March morning, flanked by Rebecca Santos and followed by a small army of reporters, she felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Today, Judge Patricia Henley would announce the sentences for Marcus Thompson, Richard Hawthorne, and 3 other executives who had pleaded guilty to federal charges stemming from the surveillance conspiracy. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Affected employees filled the gallery, their faces reflecting a mixture of vindication and lingering trauma. Elena Vasquez sat in the press section, her notebook ready to capture the culmination of the story that had consumed 2 years of investigative reporting. Even Jessica Martinez was present, having received immunity in exchange for her cooperation with prosecutors. Marcus Thompson looked diminished at the defendant's table, his trademark confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed empire had crumbled. The man who had once commanded respect as a visionary entrepreneur now faced up to 20 years in federal prison for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. Mr. Thompson, Judge Henley began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over corporate accountability cases for 2 decades. Your surveillance program represents one of the most systematic violations of employee privacy rights this court has ever encountered. You created a culture of fear and intimidation that reduced human beings to data points in your pursuit of corporate control. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom as she detailed the scope of Thompson's crimes. The surveillance network had captured more than 100,000 hours of private conversations, recorded employees in bathroom areas and private phone calls, and built psychological profiles that were used to manipulate workers' personal and professional decisions. 15 years in federal prison, Judge Henley announced, along with $3 million in restitution to affected employees and permanent prohibition from serving as an executive in any publicly traded company. The sentence was harsher than even Rebecca had hoped for. In the gallery, Olivia heard several employees gasp with relief. Beside her, David Park's grandmother, who had insisted on attending despite her frail health, whispered a prayer of gratitude in Korean. Richard Hawthorne's sentencing was more complex. His attorney had argued for leniency based on his cooperation with investigators and the devastating impact the case had had on his family relationships. Kevin Hawthorne sat in the front row, his presence a silent testament to the personal costs of his father's choices. "Mr. Hawthorne, you were the operational face of this conspiracy," Judge Henley said. "You installed the cameras, managed the surveillance data, and personally harassed employees who questioned the program. Your position of trust made your crimes particularly egregious." Richard received 8 years in federal prison, though his cooperation with prosecutors had reduced what could have been a 20-year sentence. As the bailiff led him away, he glanced briefly at Kevin, his expression carrying a mixture of shame and desperate love that made even Olivia feel a moment of sympathy for the broken family dynamics his crimes had created. The class action settlement had been finalized the previous month. $127 million distributed among 847 affected employees across 12 companies. For Olivia, the settlement meant financial security for the first time in her life, enough to complete her brother Marcus's college education, help her parents with their retirement, and establish the workplace privacy foundation she'd been planning. But the money felt secondary to the broader changes the case had catalyzed. The Workplace Privacy Protection Act, passed by Congress 6 months earlier, required companies to disclose all employee monitoring activities and obtain explicit consent for surveillance in areas where workers had reasonable expectations of privacy. The legislation included whistleblower protections and created a federal office to investigate workplace privacy violations. "You've changed the landscape permanently," Elena told Olivia as they walked down the courthouse steps after the sentencing. "Companies can't pretend anymore that extensive employee surveillance is a normal business practice. There are rules now and consequences for violating them." The personal costs of Olivia's whistleblowing had been substantial and ongoing. Her career in data analytics was effectively over. No tech company would hire someone who had exposed industry-wide surveillance practices. The constant media attention and legal proceedings had strained her relationships and damaged her health in ways that were still manifesting months later. She'd developed post-traumatic stress symptoms that made certain situations, being recorded, unexpected cameras, even routine security systems, triggers for anxiety attacks. The therapist Rebecca had helped her find explained that whistleblowers often experienced trauma similar to combat veterans. The psychological impact of challenging powerful institutions while under constant threat. "Your nervous system learned to live in a state of hypervigilance," Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Olivia's sister, explained during one of their sessions. "The legal victory doesn't automatically reset your brain's threat detection systems. Healing takes time and intentional work." The therapy had helped, but Olivia still found herself checking for cameras in new environments, still felt her heart race when unexpected phone calls interrupted her daily routine. The surveillance she'd exposed had left its own form of surveillance trauma, a persistent awareness of being watched that was difficult to shake even when the actual threat had ended. Her relationship with her family had evolved in unexpected ways. Her parents, initially terrified by the media attention and legal risks, had come to understand their daughter's actions as an extension of the principles they'd taught her about standing up to injustice. Her father had started attending community meetings about workers' rights, sharing his own experiences of workplace exploitation as an immigrant. "You did what we always hoped you would do," her mother told her during a family dinner. "You used your education and position to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's why we came to this country." Marcus had changed his major from business to labor law, inspired by his sister's example and the legal complexities he'd witnessed during the case. Sarah had been accepted to Harvard Law School with a full scholarship, her role in the social media campaign having attracted attention from progressive legal organizations. David had found new purpose working for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, using his technical skills to help other whistleblowers secure their communications and protect their digital privacy. His grandmother had become something of a local celebrity, speaking to Korean community groups about the importance of speaking truth to power regardless of personal cost. She says you reminded her of the democracy activists she knew in Korea, David told Olivia during one of their monthly coffee meetings. People who risked everything to challenge authoritarian power. She's proud to have been part of your story. Kevin Hawthorne represented one of the case's most complex emotional dimensions. His decision to provide evidence against his father had effectively destroyed their relationship, while potentially saving him from following a similar path. He'd graduated high school with honors and been accepted to several colleges, but the family's legal bills and Richard's imprisonment had created financial challenges. Olivia had quietly established a scholarship fund for children of convicted corporate executives, a way of ensuring that the next generation wouldn't be punished for their parents' crimes. Kevin was the fund's first recipient, though he didn't know Olivia was behind the financial support. "I think about the choice he made," Olivia told Rebecca during one of their regular check-ins. 17 years old, having to decide between family loyalty and moral principle. "I hope if I ever have children, they'd have his courage." The broader industry changes were still evolving. Several major tech companies had voluntarily implemented transparency policies that exceeded federal requirements, recognizing that employee trust was essential for retaining talent in a competitive market. Others continued to push the boundaries of what was legally permissible, requiring ongoing vigilance from privacy advocates and labor organizations. Elena's reporting had sparked similar investigations in Europe and Asia, where different legal frameworks were grappling with the same fundamental questions about worker privacy and corporate power. The story had become a case study in business schools and law schools, part of a broader conversation about corporate responsibility in the digital age. "You've created a template," Rebecca observed. "Other whistleblowers are using your approach: careful documentation, strategic media engagement, building coalitions with journalists and advocates. You've shown that individual employees can challenge corporate power successfully, but only with the right support systems." The lawsuit victories had enabled Rebecca's organization to expand significantly. They'd hired 12 new attorneys and opened offices in 3 additional cities, providing free legal representation to workers facing retaliation for reporting workplace violations. The organization had handled 347 cases in the 18 months since Olivia's story broke, a testament to how many workers had been waiting for someone to show them that resistance was possible. As spring turned to summer, Olivia began planning the next phase of her life. The Workplace Privacy Foundation she'd established was funding research into surveillance technologies, providing legal support for new whistleblowers, and developing educational programs to help workers understand their rights. She'd been invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing her experience and encouraging others to challenge workplace violations. "I never wanted to be a public figure," she told Sarah during one of their evening walks. "But if my experience can prevent other people from being violated the way we were, then maybe the personal cost was worth it." "You know what I think?" Sarah replied. "I think you're exactly the kind of person who should be a public figure. Someone who didn't seek attention or glory, but acted because it was right. Someone who understands the real cost of challenging power because you've paid it." The criminal sentences represented legal accountability, but the deeper changes were cultural and systemic. Workplace surveillance could no longer hide behind claims of productivity optimization or security concerns. Workers had legal rights and practical tools for challenging violations. The assumption that employees should accept any level of monitoring in exchange for employment had been fundamentally challenged. As Olivia sat in her new apartment that evening, a space she'd chosen specifically for its natural lighting and privacy, she reflected on the journey from discovering a camera above her desk to reshaping national conversations about workplace rights. The scared, conflict-averse data analyst who had first questioned Richard Hawthorne's surveillance was gone, replaced by someone who understood the power of individual courage amplified by strategic collaboration. The fight for workplace dignity was far from over, but the battlefield had been transformed. Workers had weapons now: legal protections, advocacy organizations, and the demonstrated knowledge that challenging corporate power was possible. The surveillance state that had seemed so overwhelming when Olivia first discovered it was no longer an inevitable feature of modern work, but a choice that companies made with full awareness of the legal and public relations consequences. Justice, Olivia had learned, was not a single moment of courtroom victory, but an ongoing process of building systems that protected human dignity in the face of institutional power. The camera above her desk had started something that would continue long after the legal cases were resolved, carried forward by other workers who refused to accept that privacy was the price of employment. The consequences were real, the accountability was meaningful, and the change was permanent. 6 months after the federal sentencing, Olivia stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Washington School of Law, looking out at an audience of students, faculty, and labor advocates who had come to hear her speak about workplace privacy rights. The invitation had come from Sarah, now in her second year at Harvard Law, but visiting Seattle for a conference on digital rights and corporate accountability. 3 years ago, I was a data analyst who just wanted to do my job without being watched, Olivia began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from having told this story hundreds of times. I never imagined that questioning a single camera would lead to federal legislation, criminal prosecutions, and a national conversation about worker dignity in the digital age. The audience was attentive in the way that suggested they understood they were hearing from someone who had changed the landscape they would be working in as future attorneys. Olivia had learned to read these crowds, the mix of admiration and curiosity about what it really cost to challenge institutional power. But the most important thing I want you to understand, she continued, is that meaningful change doesn't come from individual heroism. It comes from building systems that protect people who don't avenue the resources, knowledge, or platform to protect themselves. The Collins Foundation for Workplace Privacy had become exactly that kind of system. Established with Olivia's settlement funds and growing through donations from privacy advocates and labor organizations, the foundation had helped 89 workplace whistleblowers navigate legal challenges in its first 18 months of operation. More importantly, it had funded research that led to the development of detection tools that could identify hidden surveillance equipment, technology now used by labor unions and employee advocacy groups across the country. After her speech, Olivia was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Amanda Chen, a first-year law student with a familiar story. "I work part-time at a marketing firm downtown," Amanda said, her voice nervous but determined. "Last week, I found camera equipment in the employee break room that wasn't there before. The company says it's for security, but it's positioned to record people's personal conversations during lunch breaks." The conversation that followed was one Olivia had dozens of times since her story became public. Workers from across the country contacted her with similar situations: unexplained surveillance, suspicious monitoring, and the familiar corporate gaslighting that suggested their privacy concerns were unreasonable or paranoid. "Document everything," Olivia advised, handing Amanda a card for the foundation's legal hotline. "Take photos, record conversations if it's legal in your state, and keep detailed notes about when the equipment appeared and how it's being used. And don't let them convince you that you're overreacting. Trust your instincts." This had become Olivia's new career, helping others navigate the intersection of technology, privacy, and worker rights. She discovered that her analytical skills, combined with her hard-won understanding of corporate retaliation tactics, made her uniquely effective at helping workers build cases and protect themselves during the dangerous period between discovery and resolution. The foundation's offices occupied a converted warehouse in Georgetown, deliberately chosen for its distance from Seattle's corporate corridor and its proximity to the communities most affected by workplace surveillance. Elena Vasquez served on the board of directors, bringing her investigative expertise to help evaluate cases and coordinate media strategy when public pressure was needed to force corporate accountability. "We've created a pipeline," Elena explained during the foundation's quarterly board meeting. "Workers document violations. Our legal team provides protection. Our research division develops detection technology. And our media partnerships ensure that successful cases get public attention that deters other companies from similar programs." The model was being replicated in other cities. Similar foundations had been established in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago, each adapted to local legal frameworks, but following the strategic approach, Olivia's experience had proven effective. The movement had attracted support from unexpected quarters. Tech executives who recognized that employee trust was essential for innovation, investors who understood that surveillance scandals posed reputational risks, and even some law enforcement officials who had been disturbed by the potential for corporate surveillance to be used for criminal purposes. David Park had become the foundation's chief technology officer, developing tools that democratize surveillance detection. His team had created a smartphone app that could identify certain types of hidden cameras and audio recording equipment, making privacy protection accessible to workers who lacked technical expertise. "The technology itself isn't the solution," David often reminded audiences when demonstrating the detection tools. "Technology is just a tool. The real solution is creating a culture where workers expect privacy rights and feel empowered to enforce them." David's grandmother had become an unexpected advocate for the cause. At 90 years old, she spoke regularly to immigrant community groups about the importance of understanding workplace rights, drawing parallels between the surveillance state she'd escaped in Korea and the corporate monitoring she'd witnessed in America. She says surveillance is surveillance whether it comes from governments or companies, David translated during one of her community presentations. "The goal is always the same: to make people afraid to speak freely, to organize, to challenge authority." The legislative impact of Olivia's case continued to expand. The Workplace Privacy Protection Act had been strengthened twice since its initial passage, adding requirements for employee consent, expanding whistleblower protections, and creating stricter penalties for violations. State legislatures had passed additional protections, and several cities had enacted ordinances that went beyond federal requirements. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The assumption that employees should accept any level of monitoring in exchange for employment had been fundamentally challenged. Workers routinely asked about surveillance policies during job interviews, labor unions included privacy rights in collective bargaining agreements, and companies competed on transparency as a recruitment tool. "You've changed the conversation," Rebecca Santos told Olivia during one of their regular dinners. "Companies can't implement surveillance programs without considering the legal, public relations, and employee retention consequences. That's a permanent shift in the balance of power." Rebecca's organization had grown into a national network providing legal representation for workplace whistleblowers. The success of Olivia's case had attracted funding from foundations, individual donors, and even some corporations that wanted to demonstrate their commitment to ethical business practices. The organization had handled more than 800 cases in 3 years, with a success rate that had made corporate attorneys far more cautious about retaliating against employees who reported violations. Sarah had become a nationally recognized expert on digital rights law while still in law school. Her Harvard Law Review article on workplace surveillance and democratic participation had been cited in federal court decisions and had influenced policy discussions in Congress. She was already being recruited by civil rights organizations and progressive law firms for positions after graduation. "You started something that's bigger than any of us now," Sarah told Olivia during one of their weekly phone calls. "There are law students who chose this field because of your story, advocacy organizations that exist because of the model you created, and workers who know they have rights because of what you proved was possible." The personal costs had never fully disappeared. Olivia still experienced anxiety in certain situations, still found herself unconsciously scanning new environments for surveillance equipment, still struggled with the hypervigilance that years of legal warfare had ingrained. But therapy had helped her understand these responses as normal adaptations to extraordinary circumstances, and she'd learned to manage them without letting them control her life. Her relationship with her parents had deepened through the shared experience of challenging authority and facing consequences for principle. Her father had become active in local labor organizing, drawing on his own experiences of workplace exploitation to help other immigrant workers understand their rights. Her mother had started a support group for families of whistleblowers, recognizing that the stress of these battles affected entire families, not just the individuals who chose to speak out. Marcus had graduated with honors and been accepted to law school himself, planning to specialize in employment law with a focus on technology policy. The family dinner table often resembled a strategy session for progressive legal advocacy, with 3 generations sharing perspectives on how to build systems that protected workers from institutional abuse. The ripple effects extended to unexpected places. Kevin Hawthorne had graduated from college and was working for a nonprofit that helped children of incarcerated parents navigate the challenges of family disruption and social stigma. His experience as the son of a convicted corporate executive had given him unique insight into how criminal justice consequences affected families, and his work was helping other young people find paths forward despite their parents' mistakes. He reached out to me last month, Olivia told Rebecca during one of their conversations. He wanted to thank me for the scholarship fund, which he'd figured out I was behind. But mostly he wanted to tell me that his father's conviction had probably saved their relationship. Richard got counseling in prison, started taking responsibility for his actions. They're writing letters now, working toward some kind of reconciliation. The foundation had received a message the previous week that exemplified why Olivia's work remained necessary. A young programmer in Austin had discovered that her company was using machine learning algorithms to analyze employees' facial expressions during video calls, identifying workers who seemed disengaged or potentially disloyal based on their micro-expressions. The technology keeps evolving, Olivia reflected as she and David reviewed the case details. Companies find new ways to monitor and analyze worker behavior. But now there are systems in place to challenge these practices, legal frameworks that define what's acceptable, and workers who know they don't have to accept surveillance just because it's technically possible. The Foundation's response had become routine but effective. Legal analysis of the surveillance program, technical evaluation of the equipment and algorithms, coordination with local media to expose the practices, and direct support for employees who wanted to challenge the program. The company had quietly discontinued the facial analysis software within 2 weeks, recognizing that the reputational and legal risks outweighed any potential benefits. As Olivia prepared for her next speaking engagement, a conference of European privacy advocates who wanted to learn from the American experience, she reflected on how much her understanding of change had evolved. The terrified data analyst who had first questioned Richard Hawthorne's camera had believed that individual action was dangerous and probably futile. The advocate she'd become understood that individual action was most powerful when it connected to broader movements and institutional changes. The camera above my desk was never really about me, she had concluded her university speech. It was about testing whether workers would accept surveillance as a normal condition of employment. By refusing to accept it, by documenting the violations and building coalitions to challenge them, we proved that workplace dignity isn't a luxury or a privilege. It's a right that can be defended and enforced. The fight continued every day, with new technologies creating new surveillance possibilities, and new workers discovering that their privacy was being violated. But the infrastructure for resistance was now permanent. Legal protections, advocacy organizations, detection technologies, and a culture that no longer accepted corporate monitoring as inevitable. As Olivia boarded her flight to Brussels, she thought about the email that had started her day. A warehouse worker in Phoenix had discovered that her employer was tracking her bathroom breaks and using the data to discipline workers who took longer than the algorithm deemed necessary. The worker had contacted the Foundation for help, joining the growing list of people who knew that challenging workplace surveillance was possible because someone had done it before. The camera above Olivia's desk had been removed years ago, but its legacy lived on in every worker who refused to accept that employment required surrendering human dignity, in every company that chose transparency over secrecy, and in every legal victory that reinforced the principle that privacy rights didn't end when people clocked in for work. The lasting impact was not in any single victory, but in the permanent transformation of what workers expected and what companies could get away with. The surveillance state had met its match in the simple power of people who refused to be watched in silence. The movement Olivia had started would outlive her, carried forward by others who understood that workplace dignity was worth fighting for, one camera at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.